At its peak, a single pound of salt could be traded for a pound of gold in certain regions of medieval Europe. But here's what the history books leave out. The people who extracted this white gold often became part of the product. Their bodies, preserved by the very substance that killed them, have been discovered centuries later, still clutching their tools, their expressions frozen in exhaustion, looking for all the world like they simply paused mid-shift and forgot to start again. Tonight, we're descending into the mountain. The air will crack your throat. The darkness will swallow your sense of time. And if you stay long enough, the salt will make sure you never truly leave. Settle in. Light a candle. You're going to need it. You wake up, and your mouth already tastes like you've been licking a mineral deposit in your sleep. Which, technically, you have. The walls of your dwelling are crusted with white residue, the blanket beneath you stiff with crystallized sweat, and the water in the clay cup beside your palate has that familiar briny tang that makes you wonder why you bothered drinking anything at all. Welcome to the salt mining settlement. Population, however many bodies the mountain hasn't claimed yet. Outside, the sky is still dark, but dark in that particular way that suggests dawn is coming whether you're ready or not. You're not ready. Your arms ache from yesterday's shift. Your hands are cracked and bleeding in places you've stopped bothering to count, and your lungs feel like someone stuffed them with wool and forgot to remove it. But the mind doesn't care about your comfort. The mind cares about quotas. You pull yourself upright, and your joints protest with the kind of grinding complaint that belongs to someone 3 times your age. You're 24. You feel 60. Most miners don't see 40, so perhaps you're ahead of schedule in all the wrong ways. The settlement exists for one reason only, the white gold beneath the mountain. Every building, every person, every mule and cart and cooking fire exists in service to the salt. The church collects tithes in salt. The tavern accepts payment in salt. The cemetery, growing larger every season, is filled with bodies that were pickled by their profession long before they were placed in the ground. You pull on your work clothes, stiff with dried sweat and mineral deposits, and they scrape against your skin like sandpaper. Your flesh has taken on that particular quality that marks every veteran miner: pale, cracked, perpetually dry, no matter how much you drink. The salt is already inside you. It coats your throat, lines your lungs, and crusts in the corners of your eyes each night. Breakfast is a joke you stopped laughing at months ago. Salt-preserved meat. Salt-preserved bread, somehow. Water that tastes of salt, because everything tastes of salt. Your body craves moisture like a dying man craves absolution, but moisture is a luxury the mountain doesn't offer. Outside, other miners are gathering in the pre-dawn darkness. No one speaks much. Speaking costs breath, and breath is a resource you'll need every last gasp of once you descend. The mine entrance looms at the edge of the settlement, a black mouth in the mountainside that has swallowed better workers than you. You won't see proper daylight for months. The shifts are long enough and the descent deep enough that by the time you emerge, the sun has already set. And in winter, when the days shrink to a few gray hours, you might go weeks without feeling sunlight on your skin at all. The mountain is waiting. The salt is waiting. And somewhere in the depths and tunnels that haven't been opened in decades, there are miners who never came back up, their bodies preserved so perfectly by the dry, mineral-saturated air that they look like they died yesterday. You try not to think about that. You fail. The foreman shouts something unintelligible, and the line of workers begins to shuffle toward the entrance. Your legs move before your mind agrees to the journey. Muscle memory. Survival instinct. Or maybe just the knowledge that refusing to descend means no pay, and no pay means no food, and no food means joining those preserved bodies sooner rather than later. You step into the darkness. The mountain swallows you whole. The first ladder is slick with something that might be water, but probably isn't. Mineral deposits coat every rung, making the wood simultaneously gritty and slippery, a combination that shouldn't be possible but somehow is. You grip the sides and begin your descent, and above you, the circle of gray sky shrinks with every step downward. 50 feet. 100. The candle strapped to your forehead throws dancing shadows on walls that are beginning to glitter. The temperature shifts in ways your body can't quite process. Warmer, yes, but also drier. Each breath feels like inhaling through a cloth that's been left in an oven. The ladder system is a marvel of engineering held together by desperation and splinters. Wooden beams jammed into rock faces, rungs worn smooth by thousands of hands, rope connections that fray a little more each day. When a ladder fails, and they do fail, the bodies below have a particular sound when they hit the ground. You've heard it twice now. You try not to think about the mathematical inevitability of hearing it again. Around you, other miners descend in practiced silence. There's no energy for conversation, no breath to spare for anything but the mechanical motion of climb, grip, step, repeat. The veteran workers move with an efficiency that comes from years of this journey. The newer ones, like the boy 2 ladders over who can't be more than 12, move with the jerky terror of prey animals who've realized the trap has already closed. 200 feet down. The daylight above is now just a distant memory, a pale coin that holds no warmth and offers no guidance. Your world has contracted to candlelight and shadows, the rough texture of wood beneath your salt-cracked palms, and the sound of your own breathing echoing off walls that sparkle like frozen starlight. The salt is beautiful. You hate it for that. The walls have transitioned from ordinary rock to pure mineral deposits, white and pink and occasionally a deep amber that catches the light and holds it. In another life, you might find this place magical. In this life, you know that beauty is just the mind showing off before it kills you. The air hits your throat like swallowing a fistful of sand. Your body's first instinct is to cough, but coughing costs moisture, and moisture is already fleeing your body faster than you can replace it. You swallow instead, feeling your throat click and catch against itself. The hierarchy of the mind becomes clear during the descent. The overseers stay near the top levels, where the air is merely unpleasant rather than actively hostile. The experienced miners work the middle depths, where the salt is easier to extract and the tunnel systems are more stable. And workers like you, the expendable ones, the ones whose names the foreman probably doesn't know, you go all the way down to the newest excavations, to the tunnels that haven't been properly reinforced, to the depths where the air is so dry that your lungs will never fully recover. 300 feet. 400. The world above has ceased to exist in any meaningful way. There is only down, only the endless descent into the mountain's throat, only the growing certainty that you are being swallowed by something ancient and hungry and utterly indifferent to your survival. The final ladder ends at a platform carved into the salt itself. Your boots touch solid ground, and your legs nearly buckle from the relief of standing on something that isn't actively trying to throw you into the void. You've arrived at your workplace. The main chamber spreads out before you, and for one terrible moment, the beauty of it steals what little breath you have left. Then the dryness hits, and beauty becomes irrelevant. The chamber opens up like a wound, and the light is wrong. Your candle, that pitiful flame you've been nursing since the surface, catches the salt walls and multiplies. The reflection bounces from crystal to crystal, surface to surface, until the entire cavern glows with the diffuse white radiance that comes from everywhere and nowhere at once. It should be illuminating. Instead, it's blinding. Your eyes, already strained from the descent, struggle to make sense of a space where shadows don't behave properly and depth perception goes to die. Welcome to the White Cathedral. God isn't here, but something ancient definitely is. The main working chamber stretches perhaps 200 feet in every direction, carved out by generations of miners who came before you. The ceiling vaults upward into darkness that your candle can't penetrate, and the walls are scarred with the marks of 1,000 picks. It's beautiful in the way that a predator is beautiful. All elegant lines and hidden threat. You blink. You blink again. Your eyes refuse to adjust because there's nothing to adjust to. The white walls throw light in directions that make your brain ache, creating false horizons and phantom depths that could send a careless worker stumbling into a pit they never saw coming. The tools are waiting where you left them yesterday, because nothing in this place rusts or rots. A pick, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands. A wedge made of harder wood, used to split salt from salt. Leather bags that will hang from your shoulders until the straps carve permanent grooves into your flesh. The leather is already showing signs of the mine's unique deterioration, stiff and cracked where the salt has leached away every trace of moisture. Your eyes burn. They'll burn all day. The salt dust that hangs in the air, invisible but omnipresent, works its way beneath your eyelids and settles there like ground glass. Blinking helps for about 3 seconds. Then it doesn't. The irony of your situation is not lost on you, though thinking about it too long invites a kind of madness. Salt, the white gold, the substance that preserves meat and pays soldiers and keeps entire economies functioning. Worth its weight in actual gold in some markets. And you, who extract it from the earth with your bleeding hands and corroding lungs, can barely afford to season your own food. The mine owners never descend. Why would they? They have workers for that. Workers who will trade their bodies for wages that barely cover the cost of the water needed to survive the work. It's a perfect system if you're the one sitting at the top counting coins. You pick up your tools. The pick handle fits into the grooves of your palm like a key into a lock, your body already shaped by the work it must do. Around you, other miners are taking up positions at the working faces, spreading out across the chamber like ants in a sugar bowl, ready to spend the next 12 hours chipping away at a substance that's simultaneously keeping them alive and slowly killing them. The acoustic environment is its own particular nightmare. Every strike of a pick echoes off the crystalline walls, bouncing and multiplying until the chamber fills with a constant percussive roar that makes communication impossible and thought difficult. The salt doesn't absorb sound. It reflects it, amplifies it, throws it back at you in waves that you feel in your teeth. Somewhere in the chaos, the foreman is watching. You can't see him, but you can feel his attention like a physical weight. Work too slowly and you'll hear about it. Work too quickly and you'll exhaust yourself before the shift ends. You raise your pick. The first strike of the day sends shockwaves up your arms and white dust into the air. This is your life now. This is your life until it isn't. The pick connects with the salt face, and the vibration travels through your arms like a small earthquake that forgot to stop at your shoulders. It continues into your chest, rattles your teeth, and settles somewhere behind your eyes where it will pulse for the next 12 hours. You swing again. The same thing happens. You will swing this pick approximately 3,000 times today, and each swing will contribute to the slow disassembly of your body. This is the work that unmakes you, one blow at a time. The salt splits along crystalline fractures, falling away in chunks that range from fist-sized to boulder-sized. The good pieces, the clean white ones without too much rock contamination, get loaded into your leather bags. The bad pieces get thrown aside, adding to the growing piles of waste that will eventually need to be removed by someone even lower in the hierarchy than you. The bags fill quickly. The bags are never light. When they're loaded, you hoist them onto your shoulders and begin the trudge to the collection point, where they'll be weighed and recorded against your daily quota. The leather straps cut into your shoulders, and the salt dust works its way into the grooves, and the combination creates a pain that's both sharp and grinding simultaneously. Your shoulders have calluses on their calluses. It doesn't help. The quota system is a masterpiece of cruelty disguised as fairness. Each worker must extract a certain weight of salt per shift, where their pay gets docked. Fall too far behind and you lose more than wages. You lose water rations, food access, even the right to a spot in the workers' quarters. The numbers are calculated by men who've never lifted a pick in their lives, based on what the mine needs to produce rather than what human bodies can reasonably achieve. So you work faster than your body wants to. Everyone does. And bodies break. 3 tunnels over, a child is crawling into a crevice too small for adult workers. He can't be more than 10, small-boned and underfed, perfect for the narrow passages where salt deposits form in pure, valuable veins. His candle is strapped to his forehead, and his eyes are already showing the permanent redness of chronic irritation. He'll be blind before he's 20 if he makes it that long. You want to feel outrage. You're too tired for outrage. Save your energy for the next swing of the pick. The cut on your left palm, the one you got yesterday when a sharp crystal edge caught you wrong, has started to burn in a new and exciting way. Salt in an open wound isn't just painful. It's educational. You learn exactly how many nerve endings you have in your hand, and you learn it all at once, continuously, for hours. The wound won't heal properly down here. The air is too dry, the contamination too constant. It'll scab and crack and bleed and scab again in an endless cycle until you either stop working or lose the hand entirely. Most miners have scars that look like topographical maps of somewhere unpleasant. Swing. Collect. Carry. return, repeat. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, which is dangerous because hypnosis leads to carelessness, and carelessness leads to accidents, and accidents lead to bodies that never come back up. Your skin is changing. You can see it happening in real time, like watching a time lapse of decay. The moisture flees from your flesh, leaving it white and cracked and strangely smooth in places, rough in others. Your hands look like they belong to a corpse that's been left in the sun. Your forearms are developing a fine network of fissures that sting when you move. You're becoming the mind. Cell by cell, your body is being remade in the image of its destroyer. The foreman walks past, counting bags, counting bodies, counting productivity. He doesn't see people. He sees output units. You are Unit 7 or Unit 12 or whatever number he's assigned to your particular contribution to the quota. Swing. The vibration rattles your bones. Collect. The salt bites into new cuts. Carry. Your shoulders scream. Return. Do it again. The only way out is through, and through is measured in hours that feel like days. Somewhere in the white cathedral, a pick strikes wrong and a chunk of ceiling comes down. Not a collapse, just a reminder. The mountain is patient. The mountain can wait. You swing again. The air is trying to kill you. This isn't metaphor. This isn't poetic exaggeration. The atmosphere in this chamber is actively, measurably, enthusiastically hostile to human lungs, and every breath you take is a small surrender in a war you've already lost. The salt dust is invisible. That's the worst part. You can't see it, can't dodge it, can't hold your breath long enough to avoid it. It hangs in the air like a ghost made of crystals, and every inhalation pulls it deeper into your respiratory system. It coats your throat first, that dry rasp you've stopped noticing because noticing it would drive you mad. Then it settles into your bronchi, your bronchioles, the delicate alveoli where oxygen is supposed to be exchanged for carbon dioxide in a process that keeps you alive. The salt disrupts that process. Slowly, progressively, irreversibly. You cough, and the sound echoes off the white walls like mockery. The sputum that comes up is tinged pink, which you've learned to expect, and gritty, which you've learned to fear. You spit it onto the ground, where it joins the other evidence of slow-motion drowning that dots the floor like a constellation of mortality. The veteran miners don't speak. They can't. Years of breathing this air have reduced their vocal cords to leather straps that produce sounds rather than words. Their voices are permanent rasps, barely audible over the background noise of the chamber, and their conversations are conducted in gestures and grunts that preserve what little breath they have left. You watch one of them work, a man who might be 50 or might be 35. It's impossible to tell. His chest moves in a rhythm that isn't quite right, a hitch and catch that suggests his lungs have developed their own geography of scar tissue and crystal deposits. He'll die in this mine. Not today, probably not this year, but soon enough. His body is already more mineral than man. The thirst is constant and unquenchable. Your body loses moisture through every available surface. Your skin weeps it into the dry air. Your breath carries it away with every exhalation. Your eyes, your mouth, your nose, all of them are losing the battle against an environment that has been dehydrating organic matter for millions of years. You drink your water ration and it's gone almost before you can taste it. What you do taste is salt, because of course it is, because the water is drawn from underground sources that have been filtering through mineral deposits since before humans existed. It hydrates you the way a teacup empties an ocean. Technically functional. Practically useless. Your throat clicks when you swallow. It's been doing that for weeks now. The lining of your esophagus has taken on a texture like cracked leather, and swallowing is accompanied by a small, dry sound that reminds you of old hinges on abandoned doors. The dryness is worse than the dust. The dust is killing you slowly, but the dryness is torturing you right now in this moment, making every breath an act of endurance and every swallow a reminder of what you've lost. You dream of water. Not drinking it, just being near it. Standing beside a river. Walking in rain. Any moisture that isn't this endless desiccating hostility that pulls the life from your body one molecule at a time. Another cough. More pink. More grit. You wonder sometimes what your lungs look like now. Whether they've started to crystallize, the way the old stories say. Whether there are formations growing in your chest like the formations on the chamber walls, delicate and beautiful and utterly lethal. It doesn't matter. The work doesn't stop for dying. The work barely stops for death. You take another breath because you have no choice, and the air tastes like your own future grave. The sound comes first. Not a crack. Not a rumble. Something between them, a tearing groan that travels through the stone like the mountain is clearing its throat before speaking. Then the world moves. The floor shakes. The walls vibrate. Somewhere behind you, in one of the side tunnels, there's a sound like thunder trapped in a bottle, and then silence, and then screaming that stops much too suddenly. Collapse. Your candle blows out. The darkness is instant and complete, a physical presence that wraps around you and squeezes. You can't see your hand in front of your face. You can't see the walls. You can't see anything except the memory of light that's already fading from your retinas. Panic takes hold before rational thought can intervene. Your body moves on instinct, scrambling backward, away from where the sound came from, colliding with other bodies that are doing the same thing. Someone falls. Someone screams. The echoes multiply in the darkness until the chamber is full of noise that has no source and no direction. A candle flickers to life somewhere. Then another. The foreman's voice cuts through the chaos, barking orders in the practiced tone of someone who's done this before. Form up. Count heads. Assess damage. You find your own candle, hands shaking so badly that it takes 3 tries to strike the flint. The flame catches, gutters, holds. The light reveals faces that mirror your own terror back at you, salt-dusted and wide-eyed and profoundly aware of how close the mountain just came to swallowing them whole. The collapse was 3 tunnels over. One of the newer excavations, The ones that hadn't been properly reinforced because reinforcement costs money and workers are cheaper than timber. The entrance is gone now, sealed by a wall of rubble that looks almost intentional, like the mountain decided to close a door. There were people in that tunnel. The recovery effort begins immediately, but you understand quickly that it's not really about recovery. It's about clearing the path for future work. The foreman organizes crews to remove rubble, but the pace is measured, careful, efficient. There's no urgency because urgency implies hope, and there's no hope for whoever was on the other side of that wall. You dig anyway. Everyone digs. The salt-encrusted debris comes away in chunks that reveal nothing, then something, then things you wish you hadn't seen. A hand, pale and still, fingers still curved around a pick handle. A boot, separated from whatever leg it belonged to. A face, eventually peaceful in a way that living faces never manage. The foreman calls a halt before you find the others. The tunnel needs to be shored up before more digging can continue. Safety precautions, he says, and the irony is thick enough to choke on. That's when you see it. Not the fresh dead, but the old dead. A side chamber opened by the collapse, sealed for decades, and in the corner, sitting exactly where he sat down to die, a miner from another era entirely. He's perfect. The salt preserved him like a saint in a reliquary, every detail intact. His clothes are different from yours, older styles, older materials, but his tools are the same. The pick in his hands could have been made yesterday. His expression is exhausted, resigned, familiar. He looks like he died yesterday. He died longer ago than you've been alive. The foreman orders the chamber sealed again. The old dead aren't productive. The old dead don't contribute to quota. The old dead are just reminders of what this place does to everyone eventually, and reminders are bad for morale. You go back to work. Your hands are still shaking. The mountain watches, patient, knowing that time is on its side. It always is. The shift ends not with announcement, but with absence. The foreman stops watching. The quota counters close their ledgers. The mine exhales its workers like breath it can no longer be bothered to hold. Time to climb. Your legs don't want to participate in this process. They've been standing, walking, crouching, and kneeling for hours that might have been days, and now they're being asked to climb hundreds of feet of vertical ladder, and they have opinions about this request. Strong opinions. Negative opinions. You climb anyway, because the alternative is staying down here, and that's not an alternative at all. The first ladder is the worst. Your hands grip the rungs, and your arms shake with a fine tremor that wasn't there this morning. Your feet find purchase on the salt-slicked wood, and your knees buckle slightly with each step, uncertain whether they can support even your diminished weight. Pull. Step. Pull. The rhythm is mechanical, mindless. The last reserve of energy your body has been hoarding for exactly this purpose. Around you, other workers climb in similar silence. Conversation requires energy, and energy is a resource that depleted hours ago. What remains is will, pure stubborn determination to reach a surface that exists mostly as an article of faith at this point. Not everyone makes it. The miner 3 rungs above you stops. Just stops. His hands still grip the ladder, his feet still rest on the rungs, but the climbing has ceased. For a moment, you think he's resting, gathering strength for the next push upward. Then his grip loosens. He falls backward in a motion that looks almost graceful, almost intentional, as if he'd simply decided that down was easier than up. The sound he makes when he hits the bottom is one you'll remember for the rest of your life, however long or short that might be. No one stops to check on him. There's no point. The fall was too far, the sound too final. His body will be collected tomorrow or next week or never, depending on how much it costs and who's willing to pay. You keep climbing. The air changes as you ascend, becoming less oppressive, less actively hostile. Your lungs, conditioned to the salt-saturated atmosphere below, protest the shift in surprising ways. The cleaner air burns. It's too moist, too rich, too everything that the mind trained you not to expect. You cough, and the coughing doesn't help, and you cough again anyway. 200 feet. 300. The pale coin of sky above is growing, resolving from abstract hope into actual illumination, and you fix your eyes on it like a prayer. Your muscles have begun to cramp. The combination of dehydration, exhaustion, and sustained effort has pushed your body past reasonable limits into territory it was never designed to explore. Your calves seize. Your forearms lock. You hang on the ladder for long seconds, waiting for the spasms to pass, knowing that the next one might be the one that makes you lose your grip. The surface arrives like a surprise, even though you've been climbing toward it for an eternity. One moment you're surrounded by stone, the next you're pulling yourself onto solid ground and the sky is above you and you can breathe air that doesn't taste like your own grave. It's night. Of course it's night. The shift started before dawn and ended after sunset, and the only daylight you might have seen was filtered through a mountain's worth of rock. The stars look wrong. Too bright, too sharp, arranged in patterns your salt-strained eyes can't quite resolve. You blink, and the blinking doesn't help, and you wonder if it ever will again. Your vision has joined the list of things the mind has damaged. It's a long list. It gets longer every day. You stumble toward the settlement guided by firelight and muscle memory. Behind you, other miners emerge from the earth like the dead rising. No one looks up. Looking up requires hope. Here's the truth that all the climbing and coughing and calculating has been building toward. You wouldn't survive this. Neither would anyone you know. Neither would anyone alive today who hasn't spent years building tolerances that no modern body possesses. The medieval salt miner existed in conditions that would hospitalize a contemporary worker within days. The chronic dehydration alone would trigger systemic failures. The respiratory damage would be measurable within weeks. The joint deterioration, the skin damage, the vision impairment, all of it would accumulate faster than modern medicine could address. But that's not even the remarkable part. The remarkable part is what happened to the miners who died down there. The salt preserved them. Perfectly. Completely. With a patience that mocks everything we think we know about decay and dissolution. When archaeologists opened long-sealed tunnels in ancient salt mines, they found bodies. Not skeletons. Bodies. Skin and hair and clothes and tools, all intact, all recognizable, all looking for all the world like the miners had died yesterday and simply hadn't been discovered yet. They found men sitting against walls, still holding their picks, their expressions frozen in exhaustion that hadn't faded across centuries. They found workers who'd collapsed mid-task, their postures preserved in the exact moment of failure. They found miners whose faces still showed the specific weariness of people who'd worked themselves to death and knew it was happening. The salt that killed them also immortalized them. Think about that for a moment. The substance they extracted, the white gold that built economies and preserved armies and flavored the tables of kings, did to their bodies exactly what it did to the meat it was meant to preserve. It drew out the moisture. It killed the bacteria that would have caused decay. It held them in suspended animation while empires rose and fell and rose again. They became the product. The bodies tell us things that records never could. They show the specific patterns of joint damage caused by years of repetitive motion. They reveal the lung crystallization that comes from breathing mineral-saturated air. They demonstrate the malnutrition, the chronic dehydration, the 100 small failures that accumulated until the body simply couldn't continue. They are evidence. They are testimony. They are witnesses preserved by their own destroyer, speaking across centuries about conditions that contemporary documents rarely bothered to describe. And they're still down there. In salt mines across Europe, in tunnels that haven't been fully explored, there are workers who descended generations ago and never returned. Their bodies wait in darkness that hasn't changed since they closed their eyes for the last time. Their tools rest where they fell. Their stories remain untold because no one was there to record them. You would have joined them. If you'd been born in that time, to those circumstances, with those options available, you would have descended into that mountain and traded your body for wages that never quite covered the cost of survival. You would have coughed and cracked and slowly crystallized. You would have become one with the substance that was killing you. And centuries later, someone might have found you, perfectly preserved, looking like you just stopped working. A monument to labor that history forgot to honor. That's the cost of medieval salt. Not just in coins or trade goods, but in human bodies that the earth refused to release. Not just in lives shortened, but in deaths extended indefinitely, preserved for audiences those workers never knew would come. You couldn't survive it. No one alive today could. But somewhere in the darkness, in tunnels that haven't seen light since the feudal age, there are miners who never left. They're still holding their tools. They're still waiting to be found. The mountain keeps what it takes. And it has such patience. There is a harbor in Italy where the concrete is 2,000 years old and still standing. The seawater has been gnawing at it since before the birth of Christ. Storms have battered it. Empires have risen and crumbled around it. And yet the concrete remains, stubborn as a Roman engineer's professional pride, quietly outlasting everything we have built since. Meanwhile, Modern concrete infrastructure begins showing cracks after about 50 years. Sometimes less if the contractor was feeling ambitious about cutting corners. Bridges built in the 1960s are already being replaced. Seawalls erected in living memory are crumbling into the waves they were meant to hold back. And for 2 centuries, engineers have stood on ancient Roman harbors, marveled at their impossible durability, and declared with absolute confidence that the Romans must have possessed some secret formula, lost to the sands of time. This makes for a compelling narrative. Lost knowledge. Vanished wisdom. The ancients knew something we don't, and if only we could rediscover their secrets, we too might build things that last. There is just one small problem with this story. The recipe was never lost. Around 30 BCE, a Roman architect named Vitruvius sat down and wrote De Architectura, a 10-volume treatise on engineering and construction that covered everything from temple design to siege weapons to, yes, the proper preparation of concrete. He explained which volcanic ash to use. He specified the ratios. He detailed why certain mixtures worked better than others. And then he published it. The book was copied throughout the Roman period. It survived the fall of the empire. Medieval scholars had access to it. Renaissance architects studied it obsessively. It has been continuously available in European libraries for over 2,000 years. The mystery, it turns out, was manufactured. Not by conspiracy, but by something far more mundane. A combination of people who couldn't read Latin, people who couldn't be bothered to read Latin, and people who found it more convenient to declare ancient knowledge lost than to admit they had simply chosen not to use it. The question was never, what was the Roman recipe? The question was always, why did we stop? Begin with the ash. Not any ash, but the specific volcanic ash from the hills around Pozzuoli, a town nestled in the geological chaos of the Bay of Naples. The Romans called it pulvis putiolanus. Modern scientists call it pozzolana. Either way, it emerges from the earth with a particular chemistry that borders on the miraculous, fine-grained, calcium-rich, and absolutely ravenous for chemical reactions. The ash feels almost silky between the fingers, deceptively soft for something that will eventually become harder than most stone. It carries the faint mineral smell of deep earth, of magma chambers and ancient eruptions, of geology still warm from its violent birth. When mixed with lime and seawater, it begins a transformation that takes not hours, not days, but decades and centuries to complete. Here is what happens inside Roman concrete that does not happen inside modern concrete. Modern Portland cement contains aggregates that react badly with alkalis over time. This is called the alkali-silica reaction, and it is essentially concrete cancer. Water seeps into microscopic gaps. Alkalis interact with silica in the aggregate. Gel forms. The gel expands. Cracks propagate. The structure weakens. Given enough time, modern concrete essentially destroys itself from within. Roman concrete does something different. The same alkali-silica reaction that devastates modern mixtures actually strengthens opus caementicium. When seawater penetrates Roman harbor concrete, it does not trigger decay. Instead, it feeds the ongoing growth of crystalline minerals called tobermarite and philipsite. These crystals slowly fill the gaps in the concrete matrix, knitting the structure tighter with every passing year. the concrete literally heals itself. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily across timescales that dwarf human lifespans. A Roman harbor at 50 years old is still curing. At 200 years, it is still strengthening. At 2,000 years, it has achieved a density and integrity that modern materials scientists struggle to replicate. This is not magic. This is patience built into chemistry. The Romans did not invent supernatural materials. They simply created a mixture that used time as an ingredient, rather than fighting against it. Every decade, the crystals grew. Every century, the structure improved. Modern concrete is a sprint. Roman concrete was a marathon that never stopped running. Now comes the part that explains why we abandon something so obviously superior. Roman concrete had a problem. Several problems, actually, but one above all others, it was slow. Modern Portland cement can be demolded within hours of pouring. A building's frame can rise floor by floor, each level curing just fast enough to bear the weight of the next. Construction schedules can be measured in weeks. Contractors can bill by the milestone. Investors can see returns within a fiscal year. Roman concrete needed years to reach full strength. Years. The chemical reactions that made it so durable were the same reactions that made it so gradual. Pour a Roman harbor foundation and then wait. Wait while the ash and lime and seawater conduct their slow mineral dance. Wait while crystals form at a pace invisible to human perception. Wait while your competitors using inferior but faster methods complete 3 projects for every one of yours. There were geographic constraints as well. Pozzolana came from specific volcanic regions. The best sources were around the Bay of Naples, with acceptable alternatives found near certain other volcanic zones. Not every construction site in the expanding empire had convenient access to the proper ash. Substitutes could be found, but quality varied. The further you got from Vesuvius and its geological relatives, the harder it became to replicate the ideal mixture. When the Industrial Revolution arrived with its hunger for speed and scale, Roman concrete's limitations became fatal to its survival as a standard practice. Factories needed buildings now. Railways needed bridges now. Cities expanding at unprecedented rates needed housing now. In 1824, a British bricklayer named Joseph Aspdin patented what he called Portland cement, named for its resemblance to Portland stone. It could be made from limestone and clay available almost anywhere. It set quickly. It could be mass-produced. The fact that it would begin deteriorating within decades was not a concern that troubled 19th century industrialists. They needed buildings for their lifetimes, not for millennia. The future could worry about the future. This was not ignorance. This was a choice. The bottleneck was never knowledge. It was always time. Consider for a moment the geological accident that made Rome's construction dominance possible. The Italian peninsula sits atop one of the Mediterranean's most active volcanic systems. The Campi Flegrei, the burning fields, simmer and shift beneath the Bay of Naples like a restless god turning in sleep. Vesuvius looms over the landscape, occasionally reminding everyone that it is not finished. The Earth here has been vomiting up perfectly calibrated construction materials for longer than humans have existed to use them. This was not Roman engineering genius in isolation. This was Roman engineering genius recognizing what the landscape offered and systematizing it. The harbors tell the story best. At Caesarea Maritima, built by Herod the Great with Roman technical assistance, massive concrete structures were poured directly into the sea. The harbor at Portus, Rome's primary maritime gateway, required concrete foundations that would bear the weight of empire while waves crashed against them daily. Across the Mediterranean, from Alexandria to Carthage, Roman engineers deployed their volcanic mixture in environments specifically designed to destroy lesser materials. The seawater was not a contaminant to be avoided. This is what modern engineers kept getting wrong. Early 20th century analysts looked at Roman concrete, saw that it contained seawater, and assumed this must be a flaw, an unavoidable compromise of working in marine environments. They did not understand that the seawater was the point. The chemical reactions that formed tobermorite crystals required the specific mineral content of Mediterranean seawater. The chlorides and sulfates that would corrode modern steel reinforcement actively participated in strengthening Roman opus caementicium. What looked like contamination was actually activation. Roman engineers did not invent this through pure theoretical reasoning. They observed. Fishermen building small underwater structures with local materials noticed that certain mixtures lasted better than others. Builders near volcanic regions experimented. Failures were noted and abandoned. Successes were repeated and refined. Vitruvius was not revealing divine secrets when he wrote De Architectura. He was documenting generations of practical experimentation, systematizing knowledge that had accumulated through trial and error across the Italian peninsula. The genius was not in the discovery. The genius was in the documentation and standardization. Rome had what most civilizations did not: the perfect ash, the perfect geography, and the institutional patience to build for centuries rather than decades. Here is the part of the story that disrupts the comfortable narrative of lost wisdom. The recipe never vanished. Not after Rome fell. Not during the so-called Dark Ages. Not at any point in the intervening 2,000 years. Consider the Hagia Sophia. When Justinian ordered its construction in the 6th century, Byzantine engineers faced the challenge of creating a dome of unprecedented size. They needed concrete that could span the impossible. They needed materials that would hold against gravity's constant complaint. And they used principles remarkably similar to Roman pozzolanic chemistry because they had access to the same texts and the same volcanic materials from regions under Byzantine control. The dome has survived earthquakes that have toppled buildings around it. The concrete is over 1,500 years old and still performing. Arab engineers continued the tradition. Islamic scholarship preserved and translated Greek and Roman technical works, including those describing concrete preparation. Structures across the medieval Islamic world employed hydraulic cements that drew on the same chemical principles Vitruvius had documented. The knowledge flowed through Alexandria, through Baghdad, through Cordoba, carried by scholars who understood that practical wisdom was worth preserving. Dutch engineers in the 1600s wrote extensively about hydraulic lime and pozzolanic reactions. They were building dikes and seawalls, structures that would face constant water exposure and needed to last. They knew exactly what the Romans had known. They had the sources. They had the understanding. So why the myth of lost knowledge? Because each generation chose, for perfectly rational economic reasons, to use cheaper and faster alternatives for most construction. Not because the Roman methods were forgotten, because they were inconvenient. Medieval builders needed churches quickly to satisfy patrons who wanted to see results within their lifetimes. Renaissance architects wanted impressive facades, not necessarily millennial foundations. And when most buildings were expected to last a few generations at best, optimizing for 2,000-year durability seemed absurd. The knowledge sat in libraries, in engineering treatises, in the oral traditions of specific trades. It was accessed when needed for projects that justified the patience. It was ignored when speed and cost mattered more. Every generation had the recipe. Most chose not to use it. There is a reason lost knowledge makes for better stories than abandoned knowledge. If the Romans possessed secrets that vanished with their empire, then our current infrastructure failures are not our fault. We are victims of historical accident, doing the best we can with the limited wisdom available to us. The crumbling bridges and spalling seawalls are tragedies, not choices. If the Romans' methods were continuously available and we simply chose not to use them, the narrative becomes considerably less comfortable. Trace the economics of modern concrete and the logic becomes clear, if not admirable. Portland cement can be manufactured from limestone and clay, materials available nearly everywhere. A cement plant can be built wherever demand exists. Supply chains are simple. Production can scale to meet industrial appetites. Pozzolanic concrete requires volcanic ash from specific geological regions. The supply is geographically constrained. Transportation costs increase with distance from source. Scaling production means competing for limited materials. Portland cement sets quickly. Projects complete on schedule. Capital turns over rapidly. Returns on investment arrive within expected timeframes. Pozzolanic concrete sets slowly. Projects extend for years. Capital sits waiting. Returns on investment are delayed. And in a financial system that discounts future value against present returns, patience is expensive. Here is the quiet truth. The 50-year lifespan of modern concrete is not a bug. For the industries that profit from construction, it is a feature. Bridges that need replacement generate new contracts. Buildings that require constant maintenance generate ongoing revenue. Infrastructure with planned obsolescence built into its chemistry creates perpetual demand for infrastructure services. No one sat in a boardroom explicitly decided to build things that fall apart. But the incentive structures pointed that direction, and the market obliged. Roman roads still carry traffic in parts of Europe. They have outlasted empires, invasions, and centuries of neglect. They were not profitable to build by modern standards. The myth of lost knowledge serves a purpose. It absolves the present of responsibility for choices made. It transforms abandonment into tragedy, negligence into ignorance. The Romans were not smarter than us. They simply had different incentives. They built for empire, for permanence, for a future they expected to inherit. We build for quarterly returns. When 21st century researchers announced they had discovered the secret of Roman concrete, the headlines were breathless with excitement. Ancient Roman secret revealed. Scientists crack 2,000-year-old mystery. Lost recipe finally recovered. The papers were published in respected journals. The researchers were serious scientists conducting serious work, analyzing samples from Roman harbors with electron microscopes and X-ray diffraction equipment, mapping the crystalline structures that gave ancient concrete its remarkable properties. Their findings were accurate. Their conclusions were sound. Their presentation had just one small problem. Geologists and classicists had been publishing about pozzolanic reactions for decades. The chemistry was understood. The processes were documented. The secret had been described in technical literature accessible to anyone with a university library card and modest interest. What changed was not knowledge. What changed was motivation. The cement industry produces approximately 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. 8%. That single material, that foundation of modern construction, contributes more to climate change than most countries. The chemical process that creates Portland cement requires heating limestone to temperatures that release massive quantities of CO2, and there is no easy way around this fundamental reaction. Roman pozzolanic concrete produces a fraction of those emissions. The volcanic ash requires no heating. The lime can be produced at lower temperatures. The chemical reactions that strengthen the mixture over time sequester carbon rather than releasing it. Suddenly, ancient technology looked less like historical curiosity and more like potential salvation. The research funding materialized. The journal publications multiplied. The headlines announced discoveries. And the knowledge that had been sitting in libraries, in engineering treatises, in the continuous technical tradition of hydraulic cement expertise was presented as if brand new. This is not a criticism of the researchers. Their work advanced understanding of specific mechanisms, refined production methods, and opened pathways toward practical application. The science was genuine. But the framing mattered. Rediscovery implies the knowledge was gone. It was not gone. It was simply not profitable to implement until the consequences of ignoring it became impossible to avoid. Climate change did not teach us something new about Roman concrete. It reminded us why we should have cared all along. Pull back far enough and Roman concrete becomes just one example in a pattern so consistent it might be depressing if it were not also slightly reassuring. Passive cooling. Buildings designed to stay comfortable without mechanical climate control, using thermal mass and ventilation and shade. Ancient architects in Persia, in Egypt, in the American Southwest understood these principles intimately. The knowledge never disappeared. We simply decided that air conditioning was more convenient, at least until the energy bills and the power grid failures suggested otherwise. Crop rotation. The three-field system that sustained European agriculture for centuries, maintaining soil fertility through careful cycling of crops in fallow periods. We understood why it worked. We chose industrial monoculture instead, propped up by synthetic fertilizers, until the soil depletion and the algae blooms made ancient wisdom suddenly relevant again. Natural dyes, fiber cultivation, preservation techniques, water management systems, companion planting. The list extends across nearly every domain where traditional methods competed with industrial alternatives. The pattern is consistent. A sustainable technology exists, developed through generations of practical refinement. An industrial alternative emerges that is faster, cheaper, and more scalable, with costs externalized to the future or to someone else. The industrial method dominates. The sustainable knowledge is labeled primitive, outdated, or simply forgotten. Decades or centuries later, the externalized costs arrive. The sustainable technology is rediscovered, announced with excitement, implemented with the urgency of crisis. Repeat. There is a darkly cozy comfort in recognizing this pattern. Our ancestors were not magical beings possessed of wisdom we cannot access. They were people making practical choices within their constraints. And we are people making practical choices within ours. The difference is not intelligence or capability. The difference is incentives and timeframes. Roman engineers built for millennia because they expected their empire to last millennia. They were wrong about that, but the concrete didn't know. We build for fiscal quarters because that is what our systems reward. We are not stupid. We are optimizing for the wrong variables. The knowledge remains. It has always remained. The libraries hold the recipes. The research papers document the chemistry. The archaeological sites demonstrate the proof of concept. The question was never capability. The question is choice. Somewhere in the Mediterranean, a Roman harbor still holds against the waves, patiently demonstrating what is possible when you build for the long term. The concrete does not know it is a lesson. It does not know it is waiting. It simply endures as it was designed to until we decide we want to build things that last. Foreign ambassadors arriving in Constantinople learned the protocol quickly, usually from other foreign ambassadors who had learned it the hard way. You wanted an audience with the emperor? Lovely. First, you needed to speak with the chamberlain. You wanted your trade agreement ratified? Delightful. The chamberlain would review it. You wanted to leave the palace without accidentally committing a diplomatic incident that would haunt your career for decades? The chamberlain, it turned out, had opinions about that too. The chamberlain was a eunuch. So was his deputy. So were most of the men who actually determined whether your petition reached imperial eyes or quietly vanished into the labyrinthine filing systems of the great palace. Visiting dignitaries joked about it over wine in their guest quarters, nervous laughter echoing off mosaic walls. The Persians called it embarrassing. The Franks called it unnatural. Everyone called it suspicious. The common wisdom held that no man could see the emperor without a castrated gatekeeper's approval, and the common wisdom, for once, was not being paranoid enough. The great palace of Constantinople was not a building. It was a small city, a sprawling complex of reception halls, private apartments, administrative wings, and corridors that seemed designed to ensure visitors never quite knew where they were. Incense hung in the air perpetually, a sweet haze that softened sounds and blurred the edges of things. Silk rustled. Footsteps whispered on marble. And everywhere, moving with the particular grace of men who had learned to exist without drawing attention, the eunuchs passed like shadows with excellent organizational skills. They carried documents. They murmured in corners. They appeared at precisely the right moments and vanished before anyone thought to question their presence. Court gossip painted them as manipulators, as sinister figures pulling strings from behind purple curtains. The imagination conjured shadowy influence, whispered suggestions, emperors dancing to tunes they could not hear. The reality was both less dramatic and far more terrifying. The eunuchs were not manipulating the Byzantine state from the shadows. They were running it from filing cabinets. The difference matters. Beneath the reception halls, past the kitchens that fed thousands, downstairs that visitors were politely discouraged from noticing, the palace kept its real treasures. Not gold. Not relics. Cedar chests. The wood was chosen deliberately. Cedar repelled insects, resisted moisture, and aged well in the Mediterranean climate. A document stored properly in a cedar chest could outlast the emperor who signed it, the bureaucrat who filed it, and the dynasty that produced both. The eunuchs understood this. They planned accordingly. The imperial chancery maintained the official archives, of course. Treaties sat in designated rooms. Tax records accumulated in purpose-built depositories. Historians and officials could, with appropriate permissions, access the documented memory of the empire. The system appeared comprehensive. It was not comprehensive. It was a facade with excellent penmanship. The eunuch bureaus maintained parallel archives, separate rooms, separate chests, separate filing systems that made sense only to the men who created them. When a document was too sensitive for official storage, it did not disappear. It simply moved to a different cabinet, one that no one outside the Chamberlain's staff knew existed. The storage medium helped. Wax tablets could be inscribed, read, and then smoothed flat with a warm hand, erasing their contents entirely. Information existed only as long as someone needed it to exist. Decisions could be recorded, implemented, and then unmade from history without a trace. The paranoid courtiers who whispered about documents vanishing were not wrong. They simply misunderstood the mechanism. The documents had not vanished. They had never been in the archives anyone was allowed to search. The cedar chest sat in sub-basements locked with keys that passed from eunuch to eunuch across generations. The wood aged. The wax waited. And somewhere in the incense-thick darkness, the real records of who actually ran Byzantium accumulated in silence, patient as stone. Every bureaucracy keeps records on its employees. The Byzantine eunuchs kept records on everyone else. The dossiers were meticulous. Name, family connections, property holdings, debts owed, and debts collected. But the truly valuable information went deeper. Which general harbored grudges against which other general? Which provincial governor had a gambling problem he could not quite afford? Which senator's son had developed unfortunate tastes that would embarrass the family if they became public knowledge? Which holy man was genuinely pious and which one was running a profitable side business in relics of questionable authenticity? The scratch of stylus on wax filled the administrative chambers, soft and persistent, the sound of power being documented one vulnerability at a time. When an emperor needed to appoint a new commander for the eastern frontier, he asked his advisors for recommendations. The advisors consulted the chamberlain. The chamberlain consulted the files. What the emperor received was a curated list. 3 candidates, perhaps 4, all acceptable. All vetted. All with weaknesses the eunuch bureaus understood and could exploit if necessary. The emperor believed he was making a decision. He was selecting from a menu prepared by men who had already eliminated anyone inconvenient. The system was elegant in its invisibility. No one told the emperor he could not appoint whomever he wished. The candidates he wished to appoint simply never occurred to him because they never appeared on the lists that reached his desk. The ambitious general who might have been perfect for the role? Somehow his name never came up. The brilliant administrator with reformist ideas? Regrettably overlooked. The competent but controllable mediocrity? Highly recommended by all relevant sources. Careers rose and fell based on assessments conducted in cedar-scented rooms by men who would never command armies, never govern provinces, never wear the purple. They did not need to. They decided who would. Some names never appeared on any list at all. Not because they were forgotten. Because they had been remembered too well. The eunuch registry maintained what later centuries might call a blacklist, though the Byzantines would have considered the term crude. They preferred administrative discretion. Certain generals, regardless of their battlefield victories, never received independent commands. Certain governors, despite spotless records, never advanced beyond minor provinces. Certain senators found that every initiative they proposed met inexplicable procedural obstacles. The criteria for exclusion were practical rather than personal. Excessive ambition was the most common disqualifier. The Byzantine state had learned, through centuries of coups, that generals who won too many victories tended to start imagining themselves in purple robes. A commander who was brilliant but controllable received opportunities. A commander who was brilliant and might march on Constantinople received a comfortable retirement, a minor posting, or in extreme cases, an unfortunate accident that the official records attributed to illness. Family connections mattered as well. If a man's cousins included potential claimants to the throne, his career would mysteriously stall regardless of personal merit. If his in-laws had supported the wrong faction in the last succession crisis, doors would close before he reached them. The sins of relatives echoed through generations, recorded in files that the affected parties never knew existed. Emperors issued commands believing they understood their options. They promoted men who seemed capable and loyal. They never suspected that capability and loyalty were secondary to the chamberlain's assessment of manageability. The general who should have led the campaign remained in the capital, wondering why his talents went unrecognized. The mediocre alternative marched east, following orders from an emperor who thought the choice had been his. The veto lists did not prevent bad decisions. They prevented unpredictable ones. The eunuchs could work with failure. Chaos was the enemy. Byzantine emperors died frequently, sometimes of old age, though that was statistically unlikely. Sometimes of illness, which was more common. Sometimes of sudden, violent disagreements with people who wanted to be emperor instead, which was most common of all. The purple robes attracted ambition the way honey attracted flies, and the results were about as pleasant. The eunuchs could not prevent succession crises. No one could prevent succession crises in a system where the throne was technically elective and practically murderable. What they could do was prepare for them. The registry contained contingency protocols. When Emperor X died, which heirs existed? Which could be controlled? Which needed to be managed more permanently? Which generals would support which claimant? And what would it cost to secure their loyalty? The questions had been asked and answered long before anyone started sharpening knives. Heir assessment was particularly thorough. A prince who showed independent thinking was noted with concern. A prince who deferred to experienced advisors was noted with approval. A prince who was young, pliable, and preferably a bit dim was noted with something approaching enthusiasm. The ideal emperor from the eunuch perspective was one who would sign documents, appear at ceremonies, and leave the actual governing to men who knew what they were doing. When the old emperor's heart stopped, the succession protocols activated. Messages went to the right generals. Money went to the right accounts. The heir who would cause the least disruption found himself suddenly surrounded by supporters who materialized as if from nowhere. The heir who would cause problems found his support evaporating, his allies discovering urgent business elsewhere, his path to the throne blocked by obstacles that seemed almost organic in their inevitability. The purple was not inherited. It was assigned. And the men who assigned it could never wear it themselves, which was precisely why they were trusted to assign it fairly, or at least consistently. The most sensitive records were not merely locked away. They were written in languages that did not quite exist. Not encryption in the modern sense. The Byzantines had access to sophisticated ciphers when they needed them, but ciphers could be broken by anyone with sufficient patience and mathematical inclination. The eunuch archives used something more elegant, institutional notation, abbreviations that meant nothing without context, reference numbers that pointed to other reference numbers in other files and other chests, code names that had been assigned 3 generations ago and never written down anywhere except in the memories of senior administrators. A ledger page might read, quite clearly, that Subject 17 had been approved for Procedure Gamma pending verification from Archive 9. An outside observer could read every word and understand nothing. What was Subject 17? Who determined approval? What did Procedure Gamma entail? Where was Archive 9? The answers existed only in the minds of the men trained to know them. This created a problem that the eunuchs solved with characteristic bureaucratic elegance. Knowledge had to be transmitted across generations without ever being written plainly. Senior eunuchs selected promising juniors. Training began early, continued for decades, and included not merely the mechanics of administration but the oral traditions that made the written records comprehensible. A young eunuch learned the code names. He learned which abbreviations meant what. He learned where the bodies were buried, sometimes literally. By the time a eunuch reached senior rank, he carried in his memory a substantial portion of the empire's actual operating manual. He could read documents that looked like gibberish to everyone else. He could write instructions that only his successors would understand. And when he died, childless by definition, the knowledge passed not to a biological heir, but to an institutional one. The bureaucracy did not inherit titles. It inherited something more valuable, the ability to understand what the titles actually meant. An emperor could command anything. He could order armies to march, provinces to pay, heads to roll. His word was law. His will was absolute. His power was limited only by God and the boundaries of the known world, unless he forgot to get the seal. The imperial seal transformed wishes into orders. Without it, a document was merely an emperor's opinion, which was interesting but not binding. With it, the document became the official act of the Roman state, enforceable by the full weight of imperial authority. The distinction mattered in ways that emperors sometimes failed to appreciate until too late. The seals lived in the chamberlain's custody. This was presented as a practical arrangement. The emperor could not be expected to carry administrative implements on his person at all times. The chamberlain would handle such mundane details, freeing the emperor from more elevated concerns. The arrangement seemed efficient. It was efficient. It was also a constitutional coup disguised as office management. When the emperor issued a command that the eunuch bureaus found acceptable, the seal appeared promptly. The document went out. The machinery of state responded. When the emperor issued a command that the eunuch bureaus found problematic, complications arose. The chamberlain could not locate the appropriate seal. The document needed additional review. A procedural question required resolution. The delay was regrettable but necessary. Weeks passed. Months, sometimes. The emperor's enthusiasm waned. Other matters demanded attention. The problematic command never quite got sealed. It sat in a drawer somewhere, technically pending, effectively dead. The emperor had spoken. The state had politely declined to listen. The power was not hidden. Anyone could see that the chamberlain controlled the seals. What they could not see was that this control constituted actual governance, that the ceremonial keeper of imperial emblems held something very close to veto power over imperial policy. The eunuchs did not need to rule. They needed only to stamp or not stamp, as circumstances required. Here is the conspiracy that should have been obvious, but somehow never was. The Byzantine Empire changed emperors the way other states changed curtains. 43 emperors in 400 years, and that count includes only the legitimate ones. Coups, assassinations, depositions, blindings, monastic retirements whether requested or not. The purple attracted men who burned hot and died fast. The eunuch bureaucracy served them all, not in the sense of loyal service to each new master, in the sense of institutional continuity that treated individual emperors as temporary occupants of a permanent position. The files persisted. The protocols remained. The cedar chests accumulated documents across the decades while thrones changed hands above them. An emperor might reign for 2 years or 20, might reform the tax system or lose half the empire, might be remembered as a saint or cursed as a tyrant. The eunuchs kept their records either way. They were not corrupt. Corruption implies deviation from proper function. The eunuch system was the proper function, or at least it became the proper function through centuries of quiet persistence. They did not hijack the Byzantine state. They were the Byzantine state, the continuous thread that held together a patchwork of ambitious generals and scheming dynasties and foreign invasions and theological controversies. Modern observers like to worry about unelected bureaucrats wielding too much power, about deep states that operate beyond democratic oversight, about permanent administrators who outlast elected officials and implement their own agendas regardless of what voters decide. The concern is not unreasonable. It is also not new. The Byzantines had already solved the problem in their way. They created a permanent administrative class with no families to enrich, no dynasties to establish, no biological futures to protect. Men who could not have children would not try to make their children powerful. Men who could not become emperor would not try to seize the throne. The limitations made them trustworthy, or at least predictable. Was it a conspiracy? The whispered court gossip imagined schemes and shadowy manipulations, secret meetings where eunuchs plotted against their masters. The reality was filing cabinets. The reality was institutional memory. The reality was that running an empire required competence, and competence had to live somewhere, and it turned out to live in cedar-scented basements staffed by men who had given up everything except the ability to outlast the next succession crisis. The courtiers who suspected eunuch influence were not paranoid. They were insufficiently imaginative. They imagined conspiracy when they should have imagined bureaucracy. They imagined shadows when they should have imagined paperwork. The eunuchs did not need to conspire. They needed only to administer, and administration, conducted patiently over centuries, turned out to be far more powerful than any throne. The emperors wore purple. The eunuchs kept the receipts. The eastern edge of Britain was not built for comfort. Fog rolled in from the North Sea like something with intentions, settling into marshes that swallowed the unwary and forests where the light came through green and strange. The Iceni lived here in a landscape that seemed designed to discourage visitors, which was, frankly, part of the appeal. This was Celtic Britain, a world of hill forts and sacred groves, of gold torques twisted into shapes that meant something only the Druids fully understood. The Romans, who had arrived a generation earlier and immediately started building roads through everything, found the place baffling. The weather was terrible. The natives were worse. And the women inexplicably seemed to think they were people. Because here is the thing about Celtic society that Rome never quite processed. Women could own property. Women could divorce their husbands. Women could lead armies. Not as exceptions or oddities, but as a matter of course. The concept of a woman ruling a tribe was no more remarkable than a woman brewing ale or raising children. It was simply how things worked. Boudica married Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, sometime in the middle of the 1st century. The exact date is lost, like most things about her early life. What survives is the political arrangement. Prasutagus was what Rome called a client king, a ruler who kept his throne by keeping Rome happy. He paid tribute. He kept the peace. He pretended, with varying degrees of success, that the legions stationed a few days' march away were friendly neighbors rather than an occupying force. It was a compromise, and compromises are never comfortable. But it worked. The Iceni prospered. They kept their lands, their customs, their gold. Prasutagus walked the razor's edge between independence and subjugation with the careful grace of a man who understood exactly how sharp that edge was. Boudica bore him 2 daughters. Their names are lost. Everything about them is lost, except what happened later. And what happened later would ensure that Rome remembered them, even as it tried desperately to forget. For now, though, there was peace. The fog rolled in. The marshes kept their secrets. And a queen watched her husband navigate an impossible situation with a patience that would eventually run out entirely. Prasutagus died around 60 AD, and with him died the careful fiction that the Iceni were anything other than Roman property. He had tried to be clever. His will divided his kingdom in half, 1 portion to his daughters, 1 portion to Emperor Nero. Other client kings had used this strategy successfully, a kind of posthumous bribe that said, "Please leave my family alone. I have given you half of everything." It was the logic of appeasement, and it required Rome to honor its own rules. Rome did not honor its own rules. The procurator Catus Decianus arrived with soldiers and an accountant's eye for extraction. In Roman law, a client kingdom without a male heir reverted to Roman control. The will was irrelevant. The daughters were irrelevant. What mattered was that there was wealth here, and Catus Decianus intended to take it. He did not come to negotiate. He came to demonstrate. What happened next was public. That was the point. Boudica was stripped and flogged in front of her people, the leather biting into her back while her tribe watched. A queen reduced to bleeding meat. A message written in welts: "You are nothing. You own nothing. You rule nothing." Her daughters were given to the soldiers. The sources use careful language here, the kind of careful language that historians use when they cannot bring themselves to be direct. The daughters were violated, assaulted. The Latin allows for interpretation, and the interpretation is always the worst one. They were girls. The soldiers were not. This was not accident or indiscipline. This was policy. Humiliate the family. Demonstrate absolute power. Make it clear that Celtic customs about women and property and dignity meant nothing in the face of Roman authority. Catus Decianus had seen this work before. Broken rulers made compliant subjects. Boudica said nothing during the flogging. The sources are clear on this. She made no pleas, no protests, no sounds at all. She simply endured and watched and remembered. The Romans took everything. The treasury, the nobles' estates, the lands of veterans who had fought alongside Rome for decades. They took it all because they could, because there was no one to stop them. They were wrong about that last part. They were catastrophically, historically wrong. Grief is one thing. Rage is another. What Boudica became in the weeks after the flogging was something else entirely. Something that required a word the Romans did not have, and the Celts understood in their bones. She began to talk to other tribes. The Trinovantes, southern neighbors of the Iceni, needed little convincing. They had their own grievances, and those grievances had a name: the Temple of Claudius at Camulodunum. The Romans had built it to honor their dead emperor, which would have been fine except for how they built it. British labor, conscripted and unpaid. British taxes extracted at sword point. British land stolen to house the Roman veterans who would worship at this temple to their own conquest. The temple was magnificent. The temple was also, to every Briton who saw it, a monument to humiliation. A stone reminder, rising against the gray sky, that they were subjects in their own land. Other tribes joined. The Cornovi, the Durotriges, names that blur together in the sources but added up to something Rome had never faced in Britain: a unified native resistance. Not scattered raids or local uprisings, but a genuine coalition with a genuine leader and a genuine plan. The timing was perfect, which is to say the timing was a disaster for Rome. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus was 250 miles away on the island of Anglesey, doing what Romans did best: destroying things. The Druids had made Anglesey their stronghold, and Suetonius was methodically eliminating them. Sacred groves burned. They priests died. The spiritual heart of Celtic Britain was being cut out, while Suetonius congratulated himself on a campaign well executed. He had no idea what was gathering behind him. The numbers are disputed, as ancient numbers always are. Tacitus says 100,000. Dio suggests more. What matters is that by the time Boudica was ready to move, she commanded the largest native army Britain had ever assembled. Warriors, yes, but also farmers, craftsmen, women, elders. An entire civilization rising from the marshes, armed with iron and fury and the memory of daughters screaming. The fog was lifting. The storm was here. Camulodunum was everything Rome wanted Britain to see. A proper city, with proper streets, proper temples, proper retired legionaries living on proper stolen land. It was a showpiece, a demonstration that civilization had arrived in this damp and difficult island. The veterans who lived there had served their 25 years, collected their discharge bonus, and settled down to enjoy their remaining decades surrounded by people who hated them. They had grown comfortable. Comfortable people forget to maintain walls. Camulodunum had no walls. It had never needed them. The legions were everywhere. The province was pacified, and besides, who would dare? The veterans kept their swords above their mantles like decorations. Some of them probably still remembered how to use them. Most did not. Boudica's army arrived like a tide coming in, except tides do not carry torches. The attack was not a siege. It was an erasure. British warriors poured through streets designed for orderly Roman life, and orderly Roman life ended very quickly. The veterans fought, because they were Romans and fighting was what they did, but they were old men facing young rage, and the math was not complicated. Survivors fled to the Temple of Claudius. The great stone monument to conquest became, in its final hours, a refuge for the conquered's former masters. They barricaded the doors. They prayed to gods who did not answer. They held out for 2 days. On the third day, the temple burned. Meanwhile, the Ninth Legion was marching to relieve the city. Quintus Petilius Cerealis commanded 2,000 infantry and 500 cavalry, a force that should have been overwhelming against native rabble. Should have been. The legion marched into an ambush somewhere in the fenlands, and the fenlands swallowed them. The infantry was annihilated. Cerealis escaped with his cavalry, riding hard and not looking back. In Camulodunum, the bronze head of the Emperor Claudius was hacked from his statue and thrown into a river. It would be found 2,000 years later, still staring with empty eyes at nothing. Ash columns rose above the city, visible for miles. The copper smell of blood mixed with smoke until the air itself tasted like revenge. There was no looting. Boudica's army did not want Roman things. They wanted Roman things to stop existing. The city that had taken decades to build took 3 days to unmake. And Boudica was already moving south. Londinium was not London yet. It was barely anything, really, a trading settlement on the Thames that had existed for perhaps 20 years. No walls. No great monuments. Just warehouses and docks and merchants who had calculated that proximity to Rome meant profit. They had calculated correctly until they hadn't. Suetonius raced south from Anglesey, covering 250 miles in days that must have felt like years. He reached Londinium ahead of Boudica's army, assessed the situation, and made a decision that would haunt Roman memory for generations. He could not hold the city. He did not have enough men. The Ninth Legion was gone. Reinforcements were weeks away. Londinium had no defenses worth the name, and Boudica had 100,000 reasons to burn it to the ground. Suetonius ordered a retreat. Those who could travel were welcome to join the army. Those who could not, or would not, were on their own. The old. The sick. The stubborn merchants who refused to abandon their goods. The enslaved who had no choice in anything. Suetonius marched north with everyone who could keep pace and left the rest to whatever was coming. What was coming arrived the next day. The massacre at Londinium was methodical in its thoroughness. Tacitus, who was not given to exaggeration about Roman suffering, estimated the dead at 70,000 across all 3 cities. Modern historians suggest this is high, but not by much. The British forces did not take prisoners. They did not ransom captives. They did not, as far as anyone can tell, pause. Archaeologists digging in London still find it. A red layer of burnt debris, 13 feet below the modern street level, marking the exact moment when Londinium stopped existing. Ash and charcoal and fragments of things that used to be buildings, things that used to be lives. From Londinium, the army moved to Verulamium, another Roman settlement, another population of collaborators and colonizers, another city that had bet on Roman permanence and lost. Verulamium burned. 3 cities. Perhaps 70,000 dead. 2 weeks. Boudica had done something that no one had done before and no one would do again. She had made Rome afraid in its own province. The empire that conquered the world was watching one woman set fire to everything it had built, and for a terrible, glorious fortnight, there was nothing it could do to stop her. At her apex, Boudica commanded something Rome had never faced in Britain. Not a rebellion, but a revolution. Not a raid, but a war of annihilation. The tactical brilliance was simple, which is what made it brilliant. The legions were Rome's strength, disciplined infantry that could grind any enemy to dust given time and terrain. So Boudica denied them both. She struck where the legions were not. She moved faster than Roman messengers could report. She targeted civilians, settlements, supply lines, everything that mattered and nothing that could fight back effectively. The chariots helped. Celtic chariot warfare was something Romans had not faced since Gaul, and they had not missed it. 2-horse chariots, carrying a driver and a warrior, sweeping across the battlefield with a mobility that Roman infantry could not match. The warriors threw javelins, leaped down to fight, leaped back up to retreat. The noise alone was psychological warfare, wheels thundering against cobblestones, hooves churning through mud, iron-rimmed rims screaming against stone. Roman sources preserve her speeches, filtered through decades of retelling and the inevitable distortions of an enemy's perspective. Tacitus gives her words about freedom and tyranny, about what the Romans had done and what they deserved. Dio describes her releasing a hair from her dress as a divination, watching it run in an auspicious direction while her army roared approval. The details may be invented. The effect was not. Boudica had become something more than a queen, more than a war leader. She had become a symbol of everything Rome feared about the people it conquered, that they might, one day, stop being conquered. For 2 weeks, it seemed possible. A Britain without Rome. A return to the old ways, the sacred groves and the tribal councils and the women who ruled as equals. The legions were scattered, the governor was retreating, and 3 cities were ash on the wind. Boudica stood at the height of her power, surrounded by the largest army Britain had ever assembled, breathing air that tasted like copper and smoke and victory. It would not last. Nothing like this ever does. But for one burning moment, the impossible looked inevitable. Suetonius chose his ground with the cold precision of a man who understood that battles are won before they begin. Somewhere in the Midlands, there is a field. We do not know where. The Romans, who documented everything, did not document this. Perhaps the location was lost. Perhaps it was deliberately forgotten. What survives is the description. A narrow defile, forests protecting the flanks, a slope rising behind the Roman position. A place where numbers meant nothing and discipline meant everything. Suetonius had perhaps 10,000 men, legionaries from the 14th and 20th, plus auxiliaries. Boudica had 10 times that number, maybe more. The math should have been simple. The math was not simple. The Britons had brought their families. Wagons stretched behind the army, carrying wives and children and elders who had come to watch the final victory. It was a celebration, a communal witnessing of the moment when Rome would finally break. The wagons formed a semicircle at the edge of the battlefield, a wall of wood and wheels and spectators. It was a catastrophic mistake. The battle began with a British charge, tens of thousands of warriors pouring down toward the Roman line with all the fury that had burned 3 cities. The Romans held. The narrow ground funneled the charge into a killing zone, negating the British advantage in numbers. The legionaries did what legionaries did. They stood in formation, they threw their javelins, they drew their swords, and they killed. The charge broke against the Roman shields like water against stone. What happened next was not a battle. It was a slaughter that ran the wrong direction. The Romans advanced, step by step, pushing the Britons back into their own mass. Panic spread faster than swords. Warriors tried to flee and found their own people behind them, pressing forward, unaware that the front had collapsed. And behind all of them, the wagons. The British army crushed itself against its own spectators. Families who had come to watch victory watched their sons and husbands and fathers die instead. The wagons that had been celebration became barricade, then abattoir. Roman cavalry swept around the flanks and finished what the infantry had started. Tacitus claims 80,000 British dead. The number is probably exaggerated. The horror is not. Boudica escaped the field. How is unclear. The chaos was absolute, and chaos creates opportunities. She rode away from the place without a name, leaving behind an army that had been, hours earlier, the greatest threat Rome had ever faced in Britain. She would not ride much further. Tacitus says poison. Dio says illness. Both were writing decades later, working from sources that no longer exist, reconstructing a death that no one witnessed or no one admitted to witnessing. What everyone agrees on is the silence that followed. Boudica vanished from history in the days after the battle, and the manner of her vanishing is suspiciously complete. The Romans documented everything. They kept records of grain shipments and tax payments, of soldiers' equipment requisitions and provincial census data. They carved their bureaucracy into stone, ensuring that future generations would know exactly how many amphorae of olive oil passed through any given port in any given year. They did not record where they buried Boudica. This was not an oversight. The Romans had a practice called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. When someone was dangerous enough that even their death was not sufficient, Rome erased them. Names chiseled off monuments. Records destroyed. Tombs unmarked or demolished. The goal was not merely to kill the person, but to kill the idea of them. Boudica received something like this, but softer. Not official erasure, just convenient forgetting. No trial, no execution, no public body displayed as mourning. Just a woman who existed, who nearly destroyed Roman Britain, and who then stopped existing without explanation. Her daughters disappear entirely. After the assault, after the war, after everything, they simply cease to be mentioned. Did they die in the battle? Were they captured? Did they escape to some corner of Britain where Rome never reached? The sources do not say. The sources do not care. Somewhere in Britain, there is a grave. Or there was. It may have been plowed over centuries ago, or built over, or washed away by time and weather. Legends place her everywhere. Under a London train station, in a Norfolk field, beneath a Welsh Hilfort. None of the legends have evidence. All of the legends persist. The empire that documented soldiers' sandal sizes somehow lost track of the woman who almost ended them. The administrative machinery that could trace a single coin across a continent could not, or would not, record where one queen was laid to rest. Funny how that works. For 16 centuries, Boudica stayed dead. The Romans left Britain. The Saxons came, then the Normans, then centuries of kings and queens who had no particular reason to remember a Celtic rebel from the fog-bound past. Her name survived in fragments in Tacitus and Dio, read by scholars who found her interesting but not relevant. She was a curiosity, a footnote, a woman who had briefly troubled an empire that no longer existed. Then the Victorians discovered her, and everything changed. Victorian Britain was building an empire of its own, the largest the world had ever seen, and empires need stories. They need heroes who embody national virtues, preferably heroes who are safely dead and cannot complicate matters by having opinions. Boudica, reimagined as Boadicea, fit the bill perfectly. The bronze statue went up in 1862, positioned on Westminster Bridge with the Houses of Parliament at her back. There she stands today, a chariot queen frozen in permanent charge, her daughters beside her, her horses rearing against an enemy that is not depicted because the enemy was Rome and Rome was complicated. The irony is thick enough to taste. The British Empire, which was at that moment subjugating India and Africa and significant portions of everywhere else, adopted as its symbol a woman who had fought against imperial subjugation. The colonizers claimed the anti-colonial rebel as their own, stripping away context until she became a safe symbol of British courage rather than a dangerous symbol of native resistance. She has been reclaimed since. Feminist scholars found in her a woman who led armies in an age when Rome assumed women could not. Post-colonial historians found in her a reminder that empires always face resistance, that the conquered are never as conquered as the conquerors believe. Her image appears on British coins, which is perhaps the strangest irony of all. The grave remains unfound. Archaeologists have looked. Treasure hunters have dug. The ground keeps its secrets. Maybe that is appropriate. Rome tried to bury her memory, and the memory refused to stay buried. Perhaps her bones are doing the same, waiting somewhere in the English soil untouchable by the empires that came after. The fog still rolls in from the North Sea. The marshes still swallow the unwary. And somewhere in that landscape, a queen who nearly changed everything rests in a place that Rome could not record and history cannot find. The empire that documented everything could not erase her. That, in the end, might be the only victory that matters.